Hey everyone, welcome back to another tutorial. In this video, I'm going to show you how to use Redis. Now, what is Redis? I have the web page pulled up right here at redis.io. It says, Redis is an open source in-memory data structure store used as a database, cache, and message broker. Now, in this video, I'm going to focus on how to use Redis in order to cache your data. Now, why is this useful? Well, the example I'm going to use here is, if you remember in the previous tutorial, I showed you how to build a dashboard using the IEX Cloud API. Now, each time you hit one of these web pages in the web application, we turned around and made an API request to IEX Cloud. And the way IEX Cloud works is it actually charges you a certain number of allocated credits. So you only get a certain number of API requests per month. And many different APIs will throttle you or limit the number of API requests you make per hour, right? And so if you have a web application that's used by thousands or millions of users, a lot of people are going to be hitting this web page and getting the exact same data. So there's no reason to really turn around and hit the IEX Cloud API over and over again in order to get these fundamental ratios or quarterly earnings, because that data doesn't change very often. It only changes once a quarter, or maybe there's a revision and it changes a couple more times, but there's no reason to keep hitting the API in order to get the same data over and over again. So for this reason, it's helpful to just cache this data locally and be able to return it directly back to the user that requested it. That way you don't have to make this round trip to the IEX Cloud API and get charged for credits over and over again. The second reason is that it's much faster. So retrieving information from this in-memory data structure store like this, it's super fast. So you can serve up thousands of requests like really fast right back to the user without hitting a database or without hitting another API and making the round trip network request. So it's very fast to serve data from Redis. And so those are two reasons why you might want to cache your data. And so how do you use Redis? How do we get started with it? The first step, obviously, is to install it. I have OS X, so I have my own installation instructions. So for OS X, you can use Homebrew, and most people that develop on OS X already have Homebrew, and look up how to install Homebrew if you don't have it. But you can just do brew install Redis, and that'll set up everything for you, download the dependencies, and get it installed. And after it is installed just like that, I can just type redis-cli, and I have a command line interface for Redis just like that. Now, if you're on Windows, you want to Google that, and there's a number of people that maintain Redis installations. I believe Microsoft maintains one installation, and then there's this link here, and you'll want to look up how to do an installation on Windows, and there's some Redis binaries here. Alternatively, if you've watched my channel in the past, you know that a couple months ago I created this Docker container, this Docker image called a trade kit at github.com/hackingthemarkets, and I included a variety of dependencies that I use, including databases, technical analysis libraries, brokerage API packages, and so forth. And one of the packages I included was Redis because I thought it would be very useful. And so if you're using this already and you have the Docker container, you can use that. And so I have this installed in my projects directory already. So in projects trade kit, I have this cloned from GitHub, and I just do Docker compose up, and I bring my container up. And you see I already have a timescale DB, a web application, and so forth. So that starts my Docker container. And then I just do Docker exec IT. If I want to jump on this container, you can see, let me see the name of it, TradeKit Web 1. So on my system, I have TradeKit Web 1. And then I just start a bash prompt there. And you can see I can type Redis CLI. Looks like it's not started. And so I do ets initd Redis server to start a Redis server. So I'll quit that. And let's see, ets initd Redis server start, and it'll start a Redis server here. And then now if I do Redis CLI, I have command line access on TradeKit here, and I can start using it. So the first thing I'm going to show you how to do is how to use Redis from the command line, and so that we understand it at a more low level. And secondly, we'll use the Redis package in Python in order to interact with Redis from Python. And then third, we'll modify the IEX Cloud dashboard application that we created previously and show you how to cache API responses in Redis and how to serve data up from Redis to the website. And if you are using another API besides IEX Cloud and you didn't follow that example, this is still going to be very useful, and I recommend you still learn how to use Redis because it's a very handy tool to have as part of your toolkit. So let's go ahead and get rolling with this. So I have the Redis CLI running. I'm going to go ahead and clear it and run it again. So here I am on the Redis CLI, and I want to see what's currently stored in Redis right now. So I'm going to type keys star. And so this is saying list all of the keys that are inside of Redis right now. And you see it's completely empty. And so this is a key value store is the first thing to understand. And so a key is just some arbitrary unique name that I thought of. And then in that key, I'm going to store some value. And it's as simple as that. And so let's say I want to set a key equal to some value. So let's say I want to cache the user's username. And instead of looking it up in the database or in some other place, I just want to cache it in Redis and serve it up from there. And so I just need to set some key equal to some value. So I'm going to set username equal to part-time Larry. And let's see how that works. And so now if I type keys star, you see there's a key called username. And so let's set some other thing. Let's set password, which you would probably never do, but I'm going to set my password, and my password is obviously QWERTY 123, right? And I'm going to set a password, and I'm going to do keys star. And so my username and password are cached in the database, right? And so if I want to retrieve those values, I just get it by key. So I do get username, and that'll return part-time Larry. And if I get password, I'll return QWERTY123. And so I'm just setting keys and then getting them. And so you see here, I'm just setting a key equal to some string value. And that's good enough for the tutorial that we're going to be doing here. So that concept right there is very powerful on its own. Just so you're aware though, there are a variety of other data types available in data structures. So if I search for hset here, you can see you can set the string value of a hash field. And so hset here, you can set my hash and then some attribute equal to some value. So if I did hset username, part-time Larry, and then I did hset user password, QWERTY123, you can see then if I do hget user or hget user username, right, there's actually a more complex data type here. So what we actually have is a hash called user, and it has a username of part-time Larry and a password of QWERTY123. In addition, you could do hget all, and you can get all of the keys and values for this one data structure here. So user has a username of part-time Larry and a password of QWERTY123. So a little more complex data structure there. Likewise, there's list functions here, and so you could actually manipulate some lists. So you could store like an array inside of Redis as well. So for now, I'm just going to use a string data type because what we're going to be doing is taking a JSON response, which is really just a string in a way, and we can just store that string under some key in Redis. And so if let's say I have a JSON response and it represents fundamental data, right? And I just want to set fundamental data. So set a key called fundamental data equal to some long JSON string, right? So I could do, let's say it has a profit to earnings ratio of 100 in here and some profit to earnings to growth ratio. So a PEG ratio of 1.3 or something like that, right? So that's a key and value as well. And so this is just storing a JSON structure inside of a key called fundamental data, right? And then I can get this JSON back out and convert that string back into a Python data structure that I can serve back up to the user. And I can process this JSON string here, and maybe I want to render it as a dashboard widget. So you can see how I could get an API response as JSON like this and store it inside of a key. Now, there are a couple other considerations to make here, because let's say we have lots of different stocks in which we do, right? And so if I looked up the fundamental data for Microsoft and I stored it in a key called fundamental data and then pulled it out, that would work really well. But what happens when I change symbols to Apple and I retrieve the fundamental data for Apple and I store it in a key called fundamental data? I would actually overwrite the fundamental data for Microsoft and lose that cache. So you want to use keys that are unique. So if you're storing Microsoft's fundamental data, you might do a set Microsoft fundamental data, right? And then that would be some Microsoft's fundamental data would be in here. And then you might want to set Apple fundamental data. So you want these unique keys, right, with unique values, so that they don't overwrite each other, right? And so I have Apple fundamental data, right? And so what we'll be doing is dynamically generating these keys so that we can find them in the future and storing the values that are unique to each particular stock. And then, so now let's look at the keys here and let's talk about how would you get rid of, now that I've decided these keys are what we're going to use, I don't need this fundamental data key, so I can type del fundamental data to remove that data from the cache. So it's great that you can cache Microsoft and Apple's fundamental data inside of Redis and serve it right back up to the browser. But if you keep fetching this data from the cache, eventually it's going to be outdated, right? I could cache someone's username, but what if they change their username? Even though they don't do this very frequently, eventually you want to update the cache and refresh it. And so in order to handle this, you should pay attention to cache expiration. So if I type expire here, you can see that you can expire the cache, which means the data will go away after a certain amount of time, right? And so if I look at expire, I can set a key, but then I can expire that key after a certain number of seconds. So if I do expire Microsoft fundamental data, and I put 10, that's going to expire Microsoft fundamental data in 10 seconds. So if I wait 10 seconds here and then look at the keys again, you'll see that the Microsoft fundamental data key here is going to get deleted, right? So you can see now it's already gone. And let me do this for Apple as well, right? So I'll do expire Apple fundamental data in 10 seconds. I'll type key star. You'll see Apple still there. I'm going to fetch it from the cache. I type it again. I can type Apple fundamental data. I'm going to get it. And eventually that's going to return nil, right? And so now I look and you see it's no longer there. So what we're going to do in our web application is we're going to fetch data from that key. And if that data is available, we're going to serve it back up. But if it's expired, right? If it's expired and returns nil, then we know to hit the API again, right? Fetch new copy of the data and then store it back in that key, right? And so we can use this cache expiration to control how long this data gets cached. So maybe we'll cache it for 24 hours. So we'll multiply, there's 86,400 seconds in a day, I believe, 24 times 60 times 60. And we can just expire things after 86,400 seconds. And then, that's the equivalent of caching data for 24 hours. And then the next day rolls around, right? We go to fetch that data again. It's no longer in the cache. So we say hit IEX Cloud and get a new copy of the data and then cache it again. And we're good for another 24 hours. So let's go over to the Python side and we'll see how to do that in the Python code and add it into our web application and we'll be done. So the first thing I'll do here is I'm going to create just a simple script standalone just to show a very simple example of using the Redis package from Python. So if you type Python Redis, there's a Python package as usual. There's always a Python package for everything. And so you just do your pip install Redis. So I'm just going to do a pip3 install Redis on my system here. And then make sure you have the Redis package installed. And then once you're inside of a script where that has access to your environment, I'm going to import Redis, right? That imports the package. And then all you need to do is create a new Redis client here. And so this has r equals redis.redis. Okay. So I'm going to call this client though, because sometimes I use r when I'm working with requests. I use that variable name a lot. And so I'm going to just call it a client, or you can call it Redis client or whatever you want. So I'll just do one called Redis client. Redis underscore client equals Redis. And then we create this Redis object and we're connecting to localhost since the Redis server is running on our local system and the default port is 6379, right? And so that should give me a connection already. And if I look on my local system, right, we have some keys already, right? And then you see we have one called username and password. Let's see if we can connect to it. So I'm going to do Redis client.get. Okay. So this Redis package here has basically Python methods for accessing Redis, right? So the same way I typed get and set from the CLI, you can do Redis client.get to get some key, and then you can set some key equal to some value, and it exposes all of these functions. So if you look at hset, these hash maps and all that, there's functions for each of those, right? And so you can go through the documentation to see how to use all the different types here, but all I'm really using is get and set. So if I do Redis client.get a username here, and then I'll store this in a value. So username equals Redis client.get username. Let's see if we can print it out, right? So we're going to get it. And so you see I printed it out. I ran the program and it printed a part-time layer there. So you can see my Python script is connected to the Redis server, and I was able to retrieve a value. And so now I'm going to do Redis client.set, and I'll set Microsoft fundamental data. So I'll just make something up, fundamental data. And then I am going to give it a Python dictionary, and I'm going to do JSON.dump. So I'm going to dump a Python dictionary right in. And so I will also need to import JSON to do this. And so I'll say the profit to earnings ratio is 33, right? And so I'm going to dump a JSON string. So I'm going to get a Python dictionary, convert it to a JSON string, and I'm going to set the key Microsoft fundamental data equal to that string. And let's see how it goes. So I'm going to run this. Didn't get any errors. Now if I go to my command line just to check, and I do keys star, you see I have a key called Microsoft fundamental data, and then I'm going to get Microsoft fundamental data, and I should see the value that I set, right? So I have this JSON string called PE33. And so you see that's very easy. You can see the interface for using Redis is very simple, and it's very simple to use it from Python. It's basically the same commands, but there's a Python object here where you call some methods. So now all I need to do is go over to my dashboard here. And so I am using Streamlit. So I'm going to use Streamlit run dashboard.py, get this guy up and running again. And so you can see currently, if I go to my dashboard and I go to my overview, it's hitting the IEX Cloud API each time, right? So each time I go to the overview screen, it calls stock.getLogo, and this is making a request to the IEX Cloud API and using my API token, which is charging me for credits, and it's more slow because I'm making a web request and returning that back and then returning it to the user. So what I want to do here is take this Redis client and put it inside of my web application. So at the top here, let's just put it at the top. I'm going to add a connection to my Redis client. Okay, so I'll do Redis client equals redis.redis localhost 6379, and I'll import Redis up here at the top. And then inside of my overview here, this part is calling IEX Cloud, right? And so what I'm going to do is after I get the logo, I'm going to do Redis client.set, and I'll call the key logo, and I'll just set that key equal to the response from IEX Cloud. And let's see how that works. So I'm going to just use my Redis client and set the logo next time I refresh this page. Okay, so I'm going to I'll type Apple just to make it load a new one, right? So this gives me an error. So it looks like I have a dictionary getting returned from my API, this little wrapper class that I wrote previously. So it looks like this is actually a dictionary coming back for logo. And so I'm going to do a JSON.dumps here. So I'm going to convert this to a JSON string, and it looks like I'm importing JSON already. And so now let me refresh this one more time. So I'll do, let me change symbols, right? Okay, so now it actually ran successfully, and I'm trying to set a key called logo. And yeah, let's see if that works. I'm going to go to my CLI, and I'm going to do keys star, and you see now that I have a key called logo down here. And so if I do get logo, let's see what's in there. I have a JSON string in there just like that, where I have a cached copy of this Microsoft logo, right? And so if I put that in the browser, you see I have this cached instance there, which is great, right? So I have the logo for Microsoft right there. And so now the next time I refresh the page, let's think about what happens here. So if I refresh the page here, what will happen is it's going to call the IEX Cloud API again. So even though I'm setting the cache value here, I still have this call here. So what I want to do is, instead of calling IEX Cloud, what I'm going to first do is try to do Redis client get logo, right? Redis client get logo. So I'm going to say logo equals Redis client get logo. And I'm going to comment out this part that calls IEX Cloud, right? So I'm going to do Redis client get logo, and that should be cached, right? And so now let's rerun it again. So when I run that, I try to get that JSON string from Redis and reload it, and it says byte indices must be integers. It says it doesn't want this string here. And so remember what I said previously, my existing functions here returned a dictionary, right? This returned a dictionary, and so I'm expecting this to be a dictionary, right? I do logo, and then I access the URL key when we wrote the original dashboard. And right now I just have this JSON string that I stored in Redis. And so what I want to do is do json.loads. So I can do json.loads Redis client get logo, and that'll convert it back into the right format. Let's see if that works. Okay. And so now it pulled this JSON string here. I did json.loads, it converted it back to a Python dictionary, and then it was usable when I accessed those dictionary keys in the dashboard. So you can see I was successfully able to cache the logo and then load it back up. Okay, and so now that I can get the logo like that, so I'm going to do logo equals rest.client get logo. Okay. And so there's going to be situations where the logo is already there in cache, and situations where we don't have the logo in cache. So what I want to do whenever I load the dashboard is say, try to get the logo from the cache and store it in logo. And then I'm going to say if logo is none, right? If it couldn't find the logo in cache, only at that point am I going to fetch it from IEX Cloud. So if we didn't find it in cache, let's get it from IEX Cloud. And once we get it from IEX Cloud, I'll do Redis client.set logo to json.dumps logo, right? So we try to get it from the cache. If it's not in the cache, get it from IEX Cloud and cache it, right? Otherwise, we're going to say logo equals json.loads logo, right? So try to get from the cache. If it's not there, get it and set it. Otherwise, that means it is in the cache, so that means logo now has that JSON string, and we can load it up and use it, right? And so let's go ahead and print what happens here. So logo is none. I'm going to say print could not find logo in cache, retrieving from IEX Cloud API. Okay, and then otherwise, I'm going to say print found logo in cache serving from Redis. Okay, and let's see how that goes. So now I'm going to run it. So I'll run it here. Okay, it looks like it already happened, and it says found logo in cache serving from Redis. So you see my console here says it found it in cache serving it from Redis. Okay, I'm going to rerun it again, right? So basically every time I load it now, it's going to say it found it in cache. So if I go back to the overview here, it's going to print again, found logo in cache. So it's just going to keep serving it up from cache. And so now if I go to my command line here and delete the logo, right, that means it's not going to be in cache. And then I'm going to load this guy back up again. So let's say I load a different symbol, Apple, right? It's not in the cache, could not find logo in cache, retrieving from IEX Cloud API. So it's hitting the API only when it can't find it in cache. And so now if I go to get logo here in the command line, you can see it has the Apple logo in cache. And remember I mentioned earlier that you want to use unique names for your keys. And so I don't want to just call this logo, right? I want to make a naming convention for the key so that I can store all the different logos that I request separately. And so instead of just doing client.getLogo, let's make a variable for the key. So I'm going to say logo key equals, and I'll do an F string. So I'll do an F string, and I'll use the symbol, like whatever symbol they type in, I'm going to use that in the key. So I'm going to do symbol dynamically like that, underscore logo. and then I'm going to try to get the logo key from the cache. So I'm going to try to get the logo key from the cache. If I couldn't find it, I'm going to set logo key equal to JSON.logo. Otherwise, I'm going to load it from the cache. Okay, so yeah, let's see how that works, right? So now I'm going to do this. I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to set the default to load on the overview. So I'm going to do index 0 there, so that when I rerun this, it'll stay on this overview. Okay. So now you can see it could not find the logo in cache. That's because I created a new key, right? So it retrieved the data from IEX Cloud, and this should have set a new key inside of the Redis client. So if I do keys star now, you'll see I have a key called Apple logo, right? Because I made that naming convention, right? And so if I run this and refresh the page for Apple, or I refresh the page, it looks like my default symbol is Microsoft. It's going to say it couldn't find the logo in cache because it's looking for Microsoft_logo, right? So now if I do keys star, you see I have one for Apple logo and Microsoft logo. Okay, so there's the Microsoft logo, and here's the Apple logo, right? And then now, no matter how many times I refresh the page, right, now it's going to find the logo in the cache and serve it from Redis. And if I switch to Apple, it's going to find the logo in the cache and serve it from Redis. And then now if I do a new one like Netflix, right, it's going to say could not find logo in the cache. So it's going to retrieve the logo it doesn't know about, and it's going to make a new cache key. And you see I have one called Netflix logo, right? So I know it's a very simple concept, and I hit it a number of ways, but you get the idea, right? You try to cache some data, you try to retrieve it back from the cache. If it's not there, set the new cache key, and then the next time around, it'll be there in the cache, right? Okay, and so that's the simplest example, and that's pretty much all we need to know. And the other thing I wanted to cover was the expiration time. And so let's go ahead and set an expiration as well for one of the other keys. And you can do this for fundamentals as well. I'm just going to keep it on the overview. It's the exact same concept. So we also fetched a little information about the company. And so you see here I have stock.getCompanyInfo, right? And so I'm going to use this exact same pattern. Let's say I have a company key, and then I'm going to set that equal to an F string, and I'm going to use a symbol and then underscore a company, right? So I'm going to create another key just to store this description and the CEO. And let's say I want this cache to expire once a day, or let's make it a shorter time so that we can see it happen. So I'm going to say I want this cache to expire in 30 seconds, right? So I'm going to use this exact same pattern that I did here. So I have a company key. I'm going to try to find the company info. So I'm going to try to find it in cache. So I'm going to do Redis client.get company key. And I'm going to say if company is none, then I'm going to get the company info from IEX Cloud. So I'll do print getting info from IEX Cloud. And then I'll set it in the cache. So I'll do Redis client set. So at this point, I'll set the company key equal to company. And then otherwise, that means it is in the cache, and I can do company equals JSON.loads company, right? And that'll load the string from the cache. And then I'll print that out as well. I'll just say print getting info from cache, okay? And I can do that exact same thing. And so now I'm going to rerun. And you see invalid input of type dict. So here, I didn't set, I'm going to do JSON dot dumps there. So I'm dumping the string. Let me try that one more time. Okay, cool. And so now if I go to my command line, I'm going to do keys star. And you see I have Netflix company as a separate key. So if I do get Netflix company, get Netflix company, you'll see I have all the information. So this full JSON response about Netflix with its description is stored in cache. And so you can cache these very large strings and lots of data inside of Redis. Okay, and now let's say I want to expire that data. So after I set the data, so what I'm going to do is delete Netflix company. I'm going to delete that key. So what I'm going to do now is after I set it, I'm going to do Redis client dot expire, okay, and then I need to give the key that I'm expiring and then some time delta. So I'm going to do a company key. So I'm going to expire a certain company key, this company key that I generate, at a certain time. And so to do that, I'm going to use a function called a time delta. So I'm going to import time delta as well. Okay, and this lets me set a certain number of time in seconds or days or whatever amount of time I need. And so I'm going to say Redis client.expire, and I'm going to do time delta, and I can do hours or seconds or days. And so I'm just going to say seconds equals 30. Okay, so I'm going to set a 30-second expiration time, and let's see how that goes. So I'm going to rerun this. And it says no module name time delta. So I think this is part of date time. So I'll do from date time import time delta. Let's see if that works. So I'm going to rerun that. Okay, I think that's right. So I do that, and I have Microsoft, and I do keys star. And you see I have Microsoft company. And then if I also refresh the page, you'll see in my console it says getting info from cache. So it's in cache. I'm going to refresh. It says getting info from cache. Refresh again, getting info from cache. Refresh again, getting info from cache. And then eventually this should expire, and then it'll hit IEX Cloud again to get the data again. So I'll do it again. So eventually I refresh it, and it says getting info from IEX Cloud. So the cache expires. That data is no longer available. So I do company equals Redis client.get company key, and eventually you get none because it's expired. And then I just refetch the data from IEX Cloud, and then I set it and cache it again for 30 seconds or 1 day or however much time you need. And just like that, that's really all I wanted to cover today. And so you can cache all the different types of data like news, fundamentals, and overview, and cache anything you want, whether it's an API response like this. You can technically cache, the entire rendering, like the way a whole web page looks. You can cache just certain numbers, and you can even cache some time series data. Or you can just cache an API response. Let's say you build an API that just returns JSON and you have your own API service. You don't want to hit your database over and over again. You can just return the JSON response directly from cache to some API client. And that's it. That's the way you cache data in Redis, both to save in terms of IEX Cloud credits, but also just to save time and serve up data much quicker to the end user or whoever is consuming your data service. So thanks a lot for watching, and stay tuned for the next video. Thanks.